Good morning. We are live on Facebook talking about boundaries. I'm Jupiter's S.L.U.T. That's Shameless, Luminous, Untamed, Truth. And we're here this morning with Joy Meyers. Good morning, Robin.
Good morning, Jupiter. How are you?
Pretty good. It's very early here. We're having a bi-coastal discussion. I'm on Pacific Standard Time at 6 a.m.
I'm on Eastern.
Which is where I usually am, and I'm missing a little bit this morning. So we're here today to talk about boundaries with the author of Alone But Not Lonely. Robin is, let me get the official words here, an international speaker, a fear strategist, author, and radio host. And I am so excited about the idea of a fear strategist. What a great phrase to encapsulate what so much of us need to navigate our lives. And for those of you who are new to me, I am Jupiter's S.L.U.T. I am an author, a writer, an accidental porn star, and a spiritual seeker. So, Robin, could you tell us this morning a bit about yourself and the work you do in the world?
Absolutely. Thank you for having me and for getting up so early to have me on the show or Facebook Live or whatever we call this platform.
My pleasure.
My name is obviously Robin Meyers, and now I incorporate my middle name Joy, which took me 53 years to incorporate my middle name Joy. I do deem myself a fear strategist now. I've been involved in the coaching world for a long time. Probably 8 to 10 years. And I started actually with teens, and that just transformed into women. I have 3 children, 26, 24, 22. The 22-year-old is my daughter. And so I was always very interested and involved and concerned of girls and speaking up, because I spent my life not speaking up and using my voice. So I went from everything as a teen coach for girls to a transformational coach to a strategist. But fear strategist is the final decision, because I bring back the science background that I have. I actually have a master's in molecular genetics, and I kind of thought that was an accidental thing that I just did. But when I start reflecting on my life, it actually kind of mixes hand in hand on how I stayed so quiet for so long, because as a scientist, I could easily sit in the lab and do my work that was great and quiet, and I could be there at all hours of the night because everyone else could go have life, and I was happy being alone. So it all kind of has come together in this little ball, interesting ball, but it works. It works very well. So basically I started voiceless, and now I'm trying to get every woman to give themselves permission to use their voice.
That's beautiful. And I really appreciate hearing that you are claiming your middle name of Joy.
You know, it's funny because I used to despise it, to be honest. I think my grandfather came up with the silliest poem when I was born. And I think the only reason they picked Joy was because it rhymed with boy. And it was something like, Robin Joy, we're so glad you're not a boy. And I was like, who does that? Who would do that to a kid? But as I wrote my book, and they're like, can we use your middle name? And I was like, okay. And then as I got the radio show going, they were like, we want to use your middle name. And it just kind of all fits now. I think it fits because I found my joy and claimed it. But yeah.
My middle name was Michelle growing up, which I also hated. And sometime in my late 30s, I found out that Michelle meant gift to the world.
Uh-huh.
And all of a sudden I was like, that's what I want to be. And deciding that I already am, even when I'm a mistake, and even if I'm learning clumsily, I am a gift to the world. I'm doing my part. And that doing that has really reclaimed joy in my life. And so that word joy for me is a strong directional force. And I'm glad to hear other women claiming it too. And you have such a body of expertise, having spent so much time coaching and specifically working with women and with young women and teens. So boundaries are so important, and so many of us haven't ever been taught them or even encouraged to have them, quite the opposite. So when somebody has identified that they need better boundaries in their lives, what's the most essential skill for them to get started?
That's a great question. You're right. I don't even think about, I don't think we ever really think of having those conversations, even mothers to daughters, at least growing up. You're supposed to have the talk, but they never really talk about boundaries. And I think balance and boundaries need to go together. But I think the essential thing is really becomes self-awareness. I think it really becomes each woman, young or old, understanding what is important to them. And that once you start learning who you are, young or old, I always say, for me, it's never too old. I don't care what age you are, to recreate, to do what you want, to find your voice. And for those young people, learn now. So you put those boundaries in place, but find out who you are and then know exactly what works for you. And those are the non-negotiables in your life. And you don't have to explain that to anybody. Now, society makes that a little difficult at times. So it's not easy and done, but I think as you start learning who you are and you're able to speak to it, I think it makes it easier the more you can speak up.
Thank you. And I just want to be like, but how, right? These things sound really simple until we try to put them into practice. What would be the first steps in creating healthy boundaries once you've found your voice?
That's a question.
I'm feeling a little guilty for glossing over that. How do you find your voice? Because that is so, so huge. So if you have anything you want to say about that before we jump into what do you do next, please do. Because I know for me, like, finding my voice has been, it's been a process. I feel like I've found my voice at different levels and in different areas of my life, and just finding different in other ways in which I self-silenced or diminished myself. So please feel free to talk about that before jumping in. And then what? And then what?
I'm taking a note on, and then what? So finding your voice, it's a layer and a layer and another layer. For me personally, when I wrote my book, my wake-up call, let me put it to you this way. So my wake-up call in finding my voice really was when I turned 53. When I was turning 53, my mother died at 53 of cancer. So when I turned 53, Kira, my youngest, my daughter, she was turning 21. So she was the age I was when my mother died. And I was like, oh, holy shit, if I could say that. And she even was like, wow. And for me, it was kind of like, okay, so there's lots of layers to this, because 53 is very young, forget this middle-aged sort of thing. 21 is even younger as far as where you're at in your life. And I was like, so am I living my life on purpose? I've spent all this time just kind of going through in this pattern that I thought I should be going. I went to school, I pleased everybody, did what I thought I should, got married. I got my master's in molecular genetics instead of my PhD because my boyfriend / fiance was like, I'm not waiting around. I was like, oh, okay, I'll just get my master's, and raised a family sort of thing. So it was a wake-up call. It was like, am I living my life on purpose for me? My kids are older now.
What a fabulous question. Like, everybody just like stop, write that down. Am I living my life on purpose for me? I don't think anyone ever asked me that question in my life. So thank you.
Seriously, I think every single person should ask themselves that at every stage of their life. I really do. And it's sort of like, unless the house is on fire, sit down and think about that. Think about that for just a few minutes, because life changes and every stage changes. But you have to find time that makes you happy, whatever that is. So for me, the 53 was kind of like this big, like, hold on a second. I could die tomorrow and I'm healthy, but who knows, right? So what am I really doing? Like, I have an opportunity here to, like, if this is halfway, like, I'm going to make the most of this thing. So it was my wake-up call. And it was like, you have one voice and one life, and you better start using it, chick, because otherwise no one's hearing you anyways. And so that was my wake-up call as far as using my voice. And then realizing, so if you ask a question and you don't get the answer you want, or someone says no, what happens? Nothing. You just find a new way to do something. So that started my process of, like, a wake-up call, like, okay. And that's when I really started to be like, come on, world. Because I know I'm not alone. And I know women struggle with this all the time, whether you're single, you're married, you stay at home, you're divorced, whatever those layers are, we always don't take care of ourselves. The whole self-care comes into it because we feel guilty. We are nurturers and caregivers, and we put ourselves last at a detriment. And it was time to say, okay, let's change this process a little bit, even if it's one at a time.
That question I've never heard stated quite that way, and I never asked myself that. And so I really appreciated that. The one thing I heard, but then I was like, yes, that is the question, right? That's the question that I've been dancing around, or that I found my own ways to kind of get to. The thing that I heard you say, though, that was exactly the same was the should. I use should as a red flag. When I'm doing what I should do, instead of having checked in with what do I actually want to do? What is that thing that might be a little too scary to admit that I want, or even taking the time to just check in? How do you know what you want if you don't check in to find out? We often assume that we want what we should want, and we have silenced our own voices. And that's what I found, was that I was really deaf to me.
Mm-hmm.
So
I love that.
It really flagged your should. That's something that's the same in both of our experiences.
Yeah, I love that.
So what's the first essential step in creating a boundary once you've begun to find your voice?
So I really do believe that you have to find that self-care. I mean, that time for you. So I do believe in, we were talking about this a little bit, if it's like your morning routine, I don't care what you like to do. I believe that everyone needs 5 minutes in their morning. If you like yoga, go do yoga. If you want a cup of coffee quietly, get your coffee in. But 2 questions you have to ask yourself. How do I want to feel today? And what do I need from today? And it's not what anybody else you think needs from you. It's what do you specifically need to happen for you, to you, for today. And it starts carving out that self-awareness piece. It starts carving out, you become very clear on your feelings. So whether it's self-doubt that kicks in, or the anxiety or something, my goal as a fear strategist, really, my goal is to make people aware that you realize your triggers of what sets you going forward and then what sets you going back, and shortening those triggers So the more you become self-aware, and that really comes into carving out that time for yourself. So I'm telling you, 5 minutes a day, and be nice to yourself. That's the other thing. You know, we're our worst enemy to ourselves.
I've only ever heard one other woman talk about how important a morning routine was. And it was a long, long time ago. I don't remember if I was in high school or just after high school, but a mom's friend. And I remember thinking, she's crazy. What on earth does that matter? I thought it was kind of part of her like bizarre, spoiled spirituality or something. And I really judged it. I don't know about you, but I feel I'm like following the breadcrumbs of every judgment I had in my life. I'm like, eating another one of those. Yes, morning routine. It doesn't for me have to necessarily be morning, of course, but yet a morning routine has emerged for me as I've made myself a priority in my life and taking time, just like you're saying, to ask those questions. Because what if the answer is something scary? And here we have a fear strategist.
Ta-da!
So how do you deal with that?
Well, fear is a good thing. So here's the thing about fear. Let me give you a little science in me. So the molecular geneticist in me, fear is going to happen. Our brains are wired for fear. The amygdala, there's 5 areas of the brain that are involved. However, the amygdala, the one part of our brain, stores the imprint from early pre-verbal life until you die. So every little thing that either you get fearful of, right, that has a shock to your system, or even your parent has imposed on you, just builds up. So all these things are real. So I guess the goal is for people to understand that, one, the perception of fear, it's not just an emotion in a brick wall. 2, fear is not a choice. Fear happens. The choice is how you deal with it. And what I'm trying to shift is that realizing fear is a gift. And it's an advantage because it makes you actively move through it. It makes you very present and live presently to make a decision on how you're going to react to something. Makes you wake up. There's also genetic disorder. It happens to be called Urbach-White disease that prevents people from feeling fear. It's a genetic mutation. So there is the genetics behind it that people actually, it's very rare, but do not feel fear, which blows my mind away. I was like, there's my genetics again. But it's a good thing. It's a really good thing. And I think the more people realize and shift this perception of this paralyzing, oh my God feeling, I can't stop in your tracks. And if that's happening, what's the reason behind it, right? So I kind of try and relate it to a tattoo. You know, tattoos are there. The imprint of a tattoo is there, but it's difficult to take it off, but it's not impossible. So you can remove it.
I like that. I like that a lot. And I think when you say like, oh, gee, I'm going to have a morning routine. I'm going to check in with myself about what I want and what my voice is. It all sounds so nice. And you're kind of like, where does the fear come in? And I know for myself, the fear has come in when a conflict arises, right? If I want this and somebody else or I think or society wants that, and they're going 2 different ways, what happens if I put myself first? And boy, that is a question that sometimes is terrifying. Or what if I break the taboo? And what if I break the silence? What's going to happen to me, right? And so I liked what you said about fear being about really bringing you present, really making you aware. And I think I heard too, it's kind of like, well, I didn't hear these words, but the way I understood it was as an invitation to get curious about where that fear comes from. And I would say for myself, I have to kind of get a little bit emotionally safe first, and then take some time to say like, what kind of fear is this? Is this the kind saving my life right this minute? Or is this the kind of tattoo I need to get removed? I really like that tattoo.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, it's really interesting, but it all comes down to, unless you can give yourself time to kind of think about it and think about why the reaction is there, you're not going to be able to answer those questions, right? And so I think a lot of times for me, and there's even still times, I mean, this is not all like, oh, all done, you know, I got this covered. Heck no. It's the fear of judgment and the fear of guilt. And even like, am I being selfish? Am I doing, you know, this whole balancing act? We still deal with this whole balancing act. And I think a lot of that society's pressure, you know, as to what we should be doing. Here's that should be again, versus is that what we want? And then what is that balance of what we want? And that changes throughout every stage of your life. And that's what I think, you know, life isn't perfect little boxes to check off. And I think that's how I actually went into life, and not having my mom around maybe made me do it even more, because I was doing what I thought I should be doing. But it was like, wait a second, you know, my daughter who's 22 is certainly not that way, you know. Thank goodness. She's a strong lady, that's for sure.
Well, I love how simple and doable you're like. So what's your first step going out to in setting boundaries? And you're like, make a little time for yourself. That's like, it's so simple, so doable, and yet it's actually really profound and powerful. So thank you for that. And,
you know something, I will say this, Jupiter, it's hard, right? So what I try and tell to people is, if you can this week take 3 mornings and do the 5 minutes, great. And if next week you can do 3 mornings and maybe hit 4 mornings, great. And if you miss a morning, it's okay. Don't beat yourself up. You know what I mean? Just get yourself where then it becomes a routine. Because what I notice, even personally for me, is when I get out of that, I get off. Like, I realize, like, I'm just more scattered. I'm just like not centered. I'm like, I'm all over the place, you know? So it's rewiring your brain. It's realizing that our brain controls a whole lot, and just rewiring it and creating a whole new pattern.
And we are going to go from first little baby step of carving out just 5 minutes for yourself, and maybe not even 7 days a week, but just, are there any mornings or are there any times that you can make room for you? And we're going to jump way over to the other spectrum and talk about some advanced level skills here, or for me, on the edge of my learning curve. So in your book, Alone But Not Lonely, you mentioned your personal relationship with money was unhealthy. How did you come to have a healthier relationship with money? And what roles did boundaries play in that? So I'm excited to hear kind of from 2 ends of the spectrum, like a first step and then like an intermediate, advanced maybe, or a more specific area boundary.
More like an explosion.
Yeah. So tell me about that. How did you gain that awareness? How did you decide it wasn't healthy? And then what did you do about it? Just a lot of questions at you all at once.
Well, I will say this. For me, it's still a work in progress. It's much healthier than it's ever been, but it's still a work in progress. So I think, being the youngest of 3 kids and the girl, I was always in this little protective cocoon. Not much was talked about. Communication in my family was like unheard of. And I was always in this protective cocoon. So I didn't really know much about anything, like life skills sort of stuff. I knew we'd go shopping frequently. I knew that I didn't need for anything. My parents had college set aside and all that sort of stuff. So all of that was just handed over to me when I turned 18. I grew up outside of New York City. I went to college in Ohio and grad school in Ohio. I'm still not sure how that all worked out to go that direction, but I did. And literally it was, here's a checkbook. This is your bank account. Make it work. You know, you pay rent, groceries, and tuition out of that. Okay. That was it. And so I never really had any sort of skills associated with money. And I think as I grew into adulthood, eventually, all of those unknowns were still there. For instance, if I wanted to go shopping, I went shopping. If I didn't need, or I didn't think I needed. So I never really created a savings plan. I never created, the 401k. And that kind of just transferred into my adult life when I was a stay-at-home mom. My husband had gone out and he was traveling quite a bit. So the decision was I'd stay at home with the kids. And as the two got into college, all three went to school, but there were 2 tuitions at a time. So I went back to work, I went back into corporate and stuff, but that was like the spending money. So I still never got the 401k. So unfortunately, all you women out there, like I don't have savings of my own. I have my business account. I have my account. We have a joint account. But as far as whatever IRA or retirement fund, I got nothing under Rob and Joy Meyers yet. Now that will change. That will definitely change.
Are so not alone on that. And as you were talking, what was pinging for me was boundaries are a form of self-love. And in our financial area, so what I heard you describing was kind of like, you'd been taught how to spend, but not how to create boundaries to take care of that future you. And I was really seeing like, so yes, when we say no to maybe more, I think oftentimes when people think boundaries in women, they just think, almost like self-defense lessons, how to not get raped or how to not get bullied or pushed around by your romantic partner or something. And those are certainly important parts of it. And those also are parts of self-love, right? I have a right to say yes or no. But there really are boundary issues in every area, at work, with family, with children, with money. And I just think, thank you for sharing that story. And I know there's a lot of people out there who are hungry to hear, yes, it is important that you say no to some spending, and also maybe say no to having whatever man in your life have all the financial control, or maybe you need to say yes to having money in your own name. And I know that for myself in my past, I would have thought that meant I wasn't being trusting enough, and other things, chatter that got in the way of me making healthy boundaries for me, because I thought that was disloyal, unfeminine, and not trusting, as opposed to trusting that the most important thing that I'm here to do is love me and care for me.
I love that. Well, and it's true. It's affected even our marriage in the sense of, I think he's the youngest in the family too. I don't know if that's something people should look into, and you don't marry the same person in the same rank of family. I don't know. But I think his relationship with money wasn't really great, and it was never a discussion. But I think it's always been the big fight, because although everything's kind of joint, but in his name, not that I don't have knowledge of it, I guess I get blamed for abundance or lack of abundance. So it's really learning to say, okay, now this is mine, and this is going to be put towards my business or savings, or, I'm kind of starting from scratch in that sense. But it's speaking up and not feeling like I'm doing anything wrong. It's just also protecting my future.
Well, everything you just said resonated with me so much. I was thinking of myself as so progressive and so feminist when I got married, and I particularly put my name on the bank form first. And I also didn't really think there was any real repercussions anymore. I thought those things were in the past, and like we'd hit equality. But the woman, teller, inverted our names, even though my name was first on our first bank application for our first joint account. She inverted it and put his first. And that had repercussions for our entire marriage, and small things in the beginning, like when I wanted to apply for this scholarship or something, they're like, oh, you can't because you're not the first person listed. It's not your account. I'm like, what do you mean? We're married as a joint account. Yeah, but there can only be one real owner. So you're not the real owner. So I was just like dumbfounded. And then I found that kind of thing, as I went through the divorce, bit me over and over. With it didn't matter if it was the insurance company, the bank accounts, like all kinds of accounts. Not every single one, but many of them, I was shut out and had less power and less access. And that was a really painful realization. And it was something that I would have felt guilty to take care of myself, to have my own account and my own names and things like that. But I think, conversations like this are shifting that for women. And I don't know if you know this, but what I'm working on, the workshop I'm working on for next month, is actually a conversation-based workshop for women on women's worth, which is so much bigger than money, but there's a part of that that definitely is money. So
that's awesome.
Thank you for sharing that, Juicy.
That's awesome. Well, I talk about knowing your worth and self-worth and all of that, but I find it really interesting because recently I listened to a group of women talk about a program, signing up for something, and listening to the conversations of who was one going to tell their spouse or significant other if they were signing up, and if they were going to tell them the actual cost. And it was fascinating how guilty most felt, and how many, like 90%, were trying to hide the bill.
Well, having had a legacy of being economically dependent, or say you're at home doing an ass ton of work as a parent, but society invisibilizes that, and society concretely rewards with money the work that men do. And so if you're spending any money, you're lucky to have any to spend, and you feel guilty because you didn't bring the money in. And I'm laughing now. I've been doing a lot of research to be like, a personal shopper makes $60 to $150 an hour. Event planners make a lot of money. Personal chefs, even an Uber driver, let alone a personal car service. Like, when you put together all the things that I have done in the ways that I have added value, it's literally something that my family couldn't have afforded to pay. And yet my family couldn't have afforded to pay me for half the shit I've done.
Exactly.
When I provide, and yet I have felt guilty for using family assets, even for really small things, right? And so I feel like, had those things been agreed upon in advance, oh, you're going to be the one who's hurting your career by staying home. Oh, you're going to be the one who's fuzzy brained tomorrow by being the one who gets up or whatever, and then put a number on it, put an economic value on it, and have my own bank account. I think for myself in my situation, if I were redesigning my life, if I'm ever in that kind of situation in the future, that's the kind of negotiation I hope for myself, and that I want to normalize for other women.
I think that's so important, and so great that you're going to bring that conversation out, because I think any woman who is getting into a relationship or any kind of negotiation like that needs to know that now going in, and realize, like, you have every right to put those boundaries on. And those are boundaries, of what your worth is. And it's funny, I wrote an article last year for one of the local magazines in DC called Posh Magazine, Posh 7. And it was about your worth. It was about what our income would be, our annual income would be, if, we added in the chauffeur and the cook and all that. And we easily would be at 6 figures every year.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, without a doubt, So I had a very heated conversation recently with my husband over my business and where it's at and what I'm spending and so forth and so on. And it was sort of this conversation of, but, I don't want, what are you bringing? And I was like, oh, well, let's back up 26 years, by the way, and what I brought. And that was a contract we had, remember? Mm-hmm. Think about it. It's contracts.
And that's just it. I think that most women are never even, you know, when I got divorced, what I saw was the courts reduce what I thought was this holy sanctity of marriage to
Paper.
a business contract, right? It was all only about pretty much the money, and maybe to some degree, of course, about the child welfare. But the courts really can't litigate, they can't quantify child welfare very easily. They can't even ascertain anything about that. Like the only thing they really can do is the money. And that's the one thing that that to me feels like the biggest taboo thing to talk about on the front end. The idea, like I've always heard of like, well, get a prenup as like the like lowest form of like that, of like, ew, that's what gross people do at the beginning of
I mean,
or something. Yeah, like they must not even love each other or trust each other. Now, if I were going back again, I didn't have any money. There was nothing to prenup as far as assets,
right?
Except my time. Like now, I think the biggest asset that I brought was me and my time and my sense of value. And I would do a parenting prenup if I were doing it over again. Like this is all the things involved in parenting, and these are the things that I'm agreeing to, or these are the ways that we conceive of the worth. And of course, things change, careers change and whatnot. But I would do a parenting prenup because the things that are assumed to be that women are going to do. I was at the Women's Business Association meeting not too long ago, and the women around the table were talking about how they wouldn't want to go out to a restaurant for Christmas or Thanksgiving because they don't want to make people have to work on the holidays. And I was like, I am a little embarrassed to admit that this is something I learned from my daughter, but she said to me she had the worst Thanksgiving ever after I made her be in the kitchen with me because she was old enough. I realized she made me conscious of the fact that I work overtime on holidays, right? So I work all the time, and then a holiday comes and I work overtime, right? And I never negotiated for time off. I never negotiated for benefits. I never negotiated for vacation. I didn't negotiate. I was in a group of women hearing women talk about about the kind of work that we bring to the table as not work. Oh, we'd feel guilty to like go to a restaurant. We should prepare the meal at home, do all the dishes, do the invites. I don't know any woman who isn't exhausted at the end of creating a holiday feast, right? It is work.
Right.
We don't even see it ourselves. And so I'm really thankful for my daughter for making me see it. And the following year we went out to a restaurant and had one of the best Thanksgivings ever. And I do enjoy the work of and being able to give the gift of a home cooked meal. But I believe that with something like a parenting prenup, that would be a first step towards not having that work be invisibilized.
Right. I think that's genius.
Thank you. It's my own idea.
I think it's genius. I had a friend of mine say to me, who was separated and beginning a divorce process, that marriages should have a contract, like 15-year contracts. Like you have to decide at 15 years or something like, are we up in this again or not? Which I think is true too.
I'd advocate for 7, but again, yes.
Hey, maybe it should be 7, 10, 15, I don't know.
Well, I definitely know that I'm not a historian, but I've certainly heard of cultures in which that's the case, that there are review periods and such. So I want to make sure we get to getting to talk a little bit about process. And so we're going to come back in just a moment and talk about the process of becoming and believing that you have a right to have boundaries. Kind of for myself, I've been trying to couch this conversation within the zodiac. This is my kind of zodiac. I'm not a particularly new agey person. So we have here the first house. This is this artist's rendition of the first house. And the themes of the first house are self, body, and identity. So for myself, I've been trying to kind of think about boundaries in relation to that. And I've come up with 5 different statements around boundaries for myself for this year to share with other people, and to live by myself, to really kind of codify for myself the foundation of having boundaries in my life. So this week I'm talking about your process is sacred. Learning to say no takes practice. You are allowed to be graceless, clumsy, and even wrong. Grace is not the goal, your truest self is.
Oh, I love that.
So I just wanted to open it up. If you have any questions for me around any of the things that we've talked about, or anything percolating.
I love that you said grace is not the goal, your truest self is. So how do you find your truest self?
Oh, yeah, that circles right back to that beginning, right? And to where we were with the shoulds. So I really came to a place where I was experiencing so much inexplicable pain because I'm really good at doing things right. I'm really good at people pleasing and following the rules. And if I thought I should, I did. Mm-hmm. And yet I was getting more and more and more in a place of pain in my life that was outside of my ability to how to fix it, because there was no more shoulds I could add to the list, right? And it was only when I stopped looking at the shoulds and started looking at the wants, which terrified me. I felt very selfish. I had a lot of self-judgments. And, you kind of hear, I had heard discourse around like finding your passion or what's your calling in life and things around that in empowerment. But to me, I only conceived of them in the shoulds because that's all I'd ever been able to conceive of. And placing myself and my desires first in my life, it just sounded like blasphemy compared, from how I was raised. So now, once I started kind of looking at myself and what do I want, I ended up kind of going back to that rhetoric of, well, what's your passions? Who are you? What do you want to do with your life? What's your calling? These are really big, intimidating questions. Mm-hmm. And I really only started making progress when I chunked them to like, right here, right now. Like, right here, right now. If I'm giving myself unconditional acceptance, do I want to eat or sleep? How do I feel? And I started for myself, like, how do I feel? What do I want? Wanting is part of your feelings. And I was really shut down in my feelings and didn't even know it. I just had a happy mask on all the time. So I thought feelings were okay. Feelings were good. And I wasn't even really aware that I was constantly wearing a happy mask. It was a coping mechanism I had from very early trauma and judgment young. So what I did was I started to create portraits of how I felt. And I started to take my feelings very literally. So I knew there was something wrong if I wanted to throw up, or if I felt fat, or like I literally I started doing like self-portrait photography of all of my, especially my negative feelings, because those were the ones that I didn't know how to express, that weren't safe to feel, weren't That's okay awesome. To have. And then I could look at them and I'd be like, okay, you're feeling, I don't know what to do with you. I don't like you. I wish you would go away, but you're here. And I'm no longer denying that you exist, because that didn't work. And it was never my goal to deny any part of myself. I just didn't have the skills or the space or the safety to have dealt with some of the darker emotions. And as women, I took a trip to Scotland recently, and I was like confronted with like how many thousands of our mothers were burned at the stake. Right. So at different points in history, women have paid different prices for speaking out, or for being powerful, or having their own agenda. And I think that fear, I think that the fear that I have is it doesn't necessarily map with exactly the experiences of my life. I think some of it is, whether it's DNA or epigenetics, or whether it's ancestral memory, or however you want to conceive of it. I think in some ways the past is living in me.
Mm-hmm.
And so allowing myself to not have to do it perfectly, that it's not all about me, has been, so I guess for me, I feel like I gave myself what I always call, I was a special ed math teacher, so I always call it like special ed. Like I gave myself special ed feelings 101. It was just kind of like, okay, I'm just going to look at them. So I started with portraits.
That's awesome though.
Taking myself literally.
I think that's awesome. You know, you said something which kind of struck a chord with me about really allowing ourselves to sit with the feelings and acknowledging it, and, you know, just accepting, like, where do we put these boundaries on? And for me, I think a lot of it, as much as I was a people pleaser and never wanted to do wrong to a fault, when I think back, I almost think, I don't necessarily think like my parents probably did that. I think I imposed that on myself. I don't know where that started, and maybe it's past ancestral. I have no idea. But why we do that, I don't have the answers yet for that. But I think it's something that I have carried for whatever reason. And I was just talking actually to Trisha Brooke about, we were talking about, you know, speaking and confidence and things like that. And sometimes I can be my worst villain. You know, the villain side of me comes out to myself versus, you know, the confident speaker that I can turn around and then go speak to a room full of however many women perfectly fine, you know, and it's just always that kind of be able to press a reset button. So
I have started to think of getting to go to bed at night as my reset button. And it's really true. Like, and I think that like your recommendation of having, even if it's just 5 minutes, putting it in the morning is really smart, because we do wake up in the morning with a fresh well of, we research scientists say even self-discipline, and, you know, we have extra reserves in the morning. So what beautiful advice to have started us off with. And thank you for sharing, you know, a bit about money and boundaries and your life story and your work. I'd like to invite everybody to go to your website, to follow you on social media, to get your book, Alone But Not Alone, or work with you. So please tell people, what are you offering? Where can they hear you speak or do a workshop? Or
the best way to see me, I guess, would be go to my website, which is actually nice and new and beautifully clean and new. www.robinjoymeyers. I finally have my name back, robinjoymeyers.com. And on there, you'll be able to find the links to Amazon and so forth for the book. I offer everybody a 40-minute strategy session just to speak and get to know you. If you want to try and dig in on something, there's a link to my calendar on that as well. Resource guide, my learning hub is on there as well, and my programs. And actually, I'm just uploading my new 5-minute morning routine. And I made it as like a 3 lines of how do I want to feel today? Just nice and simple 1-pager that you can do if you need a prompt. So I'd suggest go to my website. That would be the best thing. And as far as events coming up, I'll be at the Fearless Women's Summit beginning in San Francisco next Thursday, the 31st.
wow.
And traveling to 15 cities in the US before I go to Halifax and Dublin in September. So,
that is so exciting. I'm going to be in the audience in Hartford.
Awesome.
So I'm really looking forward to that. And any women in my area who want to go, let me know. We can carpool or meet up for a cup of tea before or after. So you can find me at jupiterslut.com or email me at jupiterslut.com. And I'm currently offering women's worth workshops, so you know what is so important for you to be protecting with your boundaries. That will be coming out sometime in February. So stay tuned for that. And I'm also offering one-on-one sessions with women who want to really create a deep relationship with their own body wisdom.
Love
Yeah, a greater level of trust with yourself. So I am Jupiter Slut, Shameless, Luminous, Untamed, Truth, and I teach workshops on women's worth. I'm an expert in female entitlement and the author of Masturbation Monday, which you can find on Amazon, or you can have your local bookstore order for you. All right, Robin, thank you so much. I'm looking forward to this conversation continuing throughout the year, and I can't wait to see you in Hartford. Fabulous. Good luck to you speaking in San Francisco next week.
Thank you. And thank you for doing this. And it's been great. And I can't wait to see you again. And